Well, hello and welcome. It's good to be with you again as we continue our chronological read-through of the Bible. Most of our reading to date has been in narrative form. It's been pretty fast-paced. Been able to just kind of go along in a storytelling type mode. While Leviticus is quite different. Already, Origen, a famous church father who lived from about 185 to 254 AD, so really way back in the beginning, he already noted that people tended to push back on the idea of reading through a book that seems to focus solely on ritual and burnt sacrifices. But in spite of that, some of his most famous theological writings were basically derived from the book of Leviticus. So certainly there was a lot of material there worthwhile reading and coming to understand, and had a lot to do with our faith and our life in Christ. While we're reading about things that may seem totally foreign to us, like burnt offerings, grain offerings, peace offerings, sin offerings, and on it goes, we'll also be hearing things that sound, well, quite familiar to us, like the laying on of hands, blood that takes away sin. We'll hear how God provided food for the priests and their families through these agricultural-based offerings and sacrifices of the people, primarily animals and grain and so on, and drink offerings and so on. Even as today, we do the same thing. We provide income for those who preach and teach us through our monetary offerings. So there's definitely a link there. There's a similarity between those two. I hope that by the time we're done with Leviticus that you won't see it as strange and foreign or maybe some kind of an odd precursor to Christ, but rather as foundational to what Christ does for us, as foundational for our understanding of atonement, and as foundational for our understanding of the grace and the mercy that we receive and always have received from God. In order to help meet that goal, our fireside chats are going to be a little less oriented towards storytelling and explaining, as they've largely been up to date, and more oriented to finding Christ in the assigned readings. More to the point, I hope to spend most of my time showing the promises of the reading are fulfilled in Christ. Today we're going to read the first 4 chapters of Leviticus. We're going to find instructions there for burnt offerings, for grain offerings, for peace offerings. All 3 of those are voluntary offerings whose pleasing aroma to the Lord indicates God's approval of both the offering and acceptance of the person offering it, assuming, of course, that their hearts are right with God. I say that because you might remember yourself the offerings that were made in the days after King David and King Solomon, when by and large, the people's offerings were a stench to God, and he rejected them because their hearts were far from him. In chapter 4, we'll begin a section on sin offerings. It goes into chapter 5 as well, but we're only reading as far as chapter 4 today. Sin offerings are a little different from the offerings I just mentioned because they're mandatory, and they differ based on the offense that's committed. Their purpose is to receive forgiveness from God, to cleanse the sinner. I guess 2 quick comments at this point about sacrifices and Christ. The sin offering is certainly the most obvious, the simplest. Jesus is the ultimate and final sin offering that all the previous offerings point to. Through the sacrificial death of Jesus, our debt is paid once for all. Notice also then in the voluntary offerings, something a little bit different. The voluntary offerings, the burnt offerings, the peace offerings, the grain offerings, and so on, that offering would be returned to the priest to eat. It was a holy meal. It supported the priest. God returns to us also the sacrifice Christ to eat and to drink in his holy supper, right? We go to communion and we receive his body and his blood. That offering returned to us a holy meal. There's just so much more to say. But Fortunately, I guess a lot of what we're going to be reading is somewhat repetitive, so we'll get a chance at some of these items during the balance of our readings in Leviticus. Other things we're just not going to be able to get to at all. There's a tremendous amount of things going on in Leviticus, and we won't be able to do them in our 5-minute chats. So I really encourage you to read this in your Lutheran Study Bible. The notes that are in there, they're very, very helpful. So when you read this, definitely use your Lutheran Study Bible. If you don't have one, aren't sure how to get one, get in touch with me, and we'll see what we can do. Get in touch with either me or the church office. We'll see what we can do about getting one to you. May God be with you now and bless you. Again, I pray your readings are edifying and that you will learn and grow from them. And I look forward to getting together with you. Well, at this point, it'll be again next week. May God be with you and bless your day.